Welcome to the Court of History. I'm Sean Wilentz with my compadre, Sidney Blumenthal, once again to talk about great matters, but in particular to talk about history, which is something very, very close to my heart as an historian. We're going to be talking about the assault on history that's been undertaken by the Trump administration. We're going to talk about the Smithsonian and the things that are going on there. We're going to be talking about a lot of things that relate to the ways in which this administration is trying to basically create a new kind of American history, or their version of American history, to blot out all others. And you know, Sidney, you're down there in Washington. I mean, they're going after the institutions that most Americans see or experience as understanding what American history is about, right? I mean, this is the Smithsonian. As a Washingtonian, these are particularly important institutions to you, I would have thought.
Well, whenever somebody comes to town who hasn't been to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History or the new African American History Museum, I take them. And it's always illuminating for them. I was stunned to read that while the exhibits are always rotated there, I've been backstage up in the attic of the Smithsonian. And as a Lincoln historian, I was taken and shown the Lincoln artifacts, including the teacup that he drank from and left on a ledge of the White House when he went to Ford's Theater, and shown all sorts of things. And I was a little stunned to read that one of the items that was recently rotated by under the Trump regime was the display of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. It was now taken away from display. The memoir of the great abolitionist leader. And, you might think that might be a problem given that in 2007, Trump said he was very proud that we have a museum on the National Mall, by the way, where National Guard are stationed today, taking pictures with tourists, can learn about Reverend King, so many other things. Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, I notice. Well, he's not being noticed so much, at least in having his memoir pulled from the Smithsonian under Trump now. So, this is the erasure of history is what's going on now at the Smithsonian. And what kind of version of American history do they want to forward?
Well, exactly. We'll be talking about that. And Sidney, I'm glad you brought up Frederick Douglass, because we have a particularly important guest, special guest. As an historian, if I were to name my, top 2 or 3 favorite historians, David Blight would be at the top of the list. And it's David Blight. David Blight is the Sterling Professor of History, of African American Studies, and of American Studies, and director of the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition at Yale University. He's also the author of numerous books, most prominently his Pulitzer Prize-winning Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. David Blight, welcome to the Court of History.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Sidney. May I say, too, you're in my top 3 or 4 historians, too, Sean.
Very good. Thank you.
We got all that out of the way.
We got the Mutual Admiration Society done. We go back a long way. But look, you've just written a piece in the New Republic, which goes at this very question and calls upon us all, historians, but not just historians, to defend history against this onslaught. Why don't you give us a sense of what, for those who haven't had a chance to read it, what that article has to say and what you think the problem actually is?
Well, I went first. First of all, that special issue of the New Republic, which just came out past week, was Michael Tomasky's idea, the editor there. He asked me to pull together 10 to a dozen historians, all with some experience in writing op-eds or writing for the public. And I tried to get at least half of them the younger generation and the other half old like us. And in very different fields, all kinds of fields, to address this question of teaching and writing history in this time of Trump, as he put it. So the whole issue is devoted to these essays. My own piece takes on, principally, Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, which is, of course, most people know this now, is behind, to say the least, is behind the Project 2025 book. They have been behind all kinds of appointments at the White House. In fact, part of the Heritage Foundation has simply moved into the White House. And in the essay, I call Roberts the chair of Trump's history department. Heritage Foundation has been aiming at this for years. A president so pliable to their interest in a kind of far-right, Christian nationalist, hyper-patriotic vision of the American past, which they see as the bedrock of a proper social order and the bedrock of how a historical imagination should be shaped in young people and older people as well. They base what they do on this frankly ridiculous assumption that all historians are driven by nothing but ideology, and now a left ideology, and driven by politics. Now, we know that, of course, some of our colleagues in our fields are driven sometimes by overwrought ideas and overwrought theories and overwrought ideology. But we have seen, and I lay this out in the essay, we have seen amazing revolutions in the past 60 to 70 years in all kinds of fields that hardly existed before that has reimagined, reshaped, rewritten the whole of American history. At the same time, there still is a whole American history. And it still has these creeds at its founding. It has that thing called the Constitution. It has major, huge turning points in its narrative arc that we do teach, despite what Heritage says about us. In fact, I went in and read much of what Roberts has written about our profession. And he says we don't believe in truth. He says we have no sense of virtue. He says we want to poison the minds of young people. And we have to be not only stopped, he uses the verb bury. He wants to bury us. Well, okay. So in the essay, among other things, I try to lay out this effort to, in effect, replace these revolutions in American history with a straight-laced, patriotic vision. And I suggest that Roberts come out of his well-appointed building there, right by Union Station in Washington, and debate us. I suggest in the essay a series of 2 or 3 debates. He can choose he can choose the first venue, he can choose the first moderator. He can bring 2 people, we'll bring 2 people, but come out and debate us, because Kevin Roberts is a historian, as you guys know. PhD in history from UT Austin about 22 years ago. His dissertation was on slavery in Louisiana. Guess which historians he had to read in order to write that? The people we grew up on, too. So, come on out, debate us, debate some real things. In fact, I call us the traditional historians now, as opposed to the right-wing fanatics who'd like to control history. So it's a kind of a laying down of a gauntlet to the far right's leadership of this effort to control history. And we'll see what happens. The other essays are driven by certain fields. I mean, Michael Kazin, for example, has a brilliant piece on how liberals on the left need to take back the flag, need to take back patriotism, need to reimagine how we feel about greatness in America. But he does it from Michael's own perspective. There are essays by Jen Mannion about the revolution, the history of sexuality and what that has done to many fields. And she does it in a careful way. It's not an ideological essay. Anyway, Molly Worthen writes an essay about comparing religion, which is her field, to to the academy, to universities, and how the churches and universities could learn from each other and what's happened to their reputations in American society. A lot of really smart essays, but mostly it is a challenge to the Trumpists to come out of their lair and talk to us. Now, if they don't, they won't. But it is an invitation to an attempt at a civil debate about what American history should be here as we reach the 2026 anniversary. We'll see. I haven't had a response yet from Heritage.
Well, David, if you want to start at the Court of History, we'll be happy to sponsor the very first debate. I doubt they want to come on our show, but we're volunteering our venue atop
Good.
everything.
I'll tell them that if I ever get to talk to them.
Please do. Now, but it strikes me that there are two things we're talking about, really. I mean, one is the history that they are attacking and caricaturing and what it actually is. I mean, taking out the calumny, but also their vision of history. Yeah. I've written someplace fairly recently that what they have in mind, right, is a story, a kind of providential story that culminates in Trump's divinely inspired rule. That is where it all ends. And it's not just that it's patriotic. It's not just that it's, it is a particular political spin to it, which is beyond, the old fashioned kind of, they're not standing for an old history. They're standing for a radically new history.
Yeah.
Okay. A really good point, David. Which you pointed out, this is a Christian nationalist narrative in which the country is created as a explicitly Christian nation by the founders, and followed all the way through. Roberts obviously has repudiated his early dissertation, and he's now a member of. He echoes Opus Dei, the fascist founded far right wing Catholic group, and he is, as you point out, at Heritage and essential to the creation of Project 2025, which is the blueprint for what Trump is fronting for, and it includes, importantly, as you point out, the recasting of history in the way that, totalitarian regimes in the past remade history to fit justifying what they did. So I just want to echo Sean that if anyone from Heritage or the Trump administration or Kevin Roberts himself is listening to you, that the challenge is thrown down, the gauntlet is thrown down. You are welcome to debate us. Come on, and let's discuss what you believe, and we'll hold it up to the light and to the history and the evidence and the facts.
Right. And I suggested we could have one on a major podcast like yours. We could have one, at least one, in a public venue. Let's do a public venue and have it live stream. And
Absolutely.
Then, maybe television, I don't know. But, look, Kevin Roberts even goes so far, in one of his essays on the Heritage website, he goes so far as to say, our rights do not come from laws and courts, they come from God. Now, can you imagine a lawyer going into court on any given day, arguing for a 14th Amendment case, and goes before a judge and says, these do not come from laws or courts, my precedents are God. Now, that lawyer is going to get laughed at, but okay, that's where they begin with this. And frankly, I think what they're doing, Sid and Sean, is they really are creating, or they'd like to create, and this latest letter to the Smithsonian shows it so vividly, they'd like to create a ministry of truth. Borrowing off Orwell, the ministry of truth in Orwell destroys freedom of mind, it destroys consciousness itself, and it ultimately destroys civilization. Well, they will never admit that's their goal, but they want a ministry of truth, and hence that attempt now to literally take over the functioning of the great Smithsonian institution, as though the people running it don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. And the ministry of truth covers a lot of ground in Orwell and in reality, but history is always at the core of it. I mean, they have to rewrite American history, because if you understand history differently from the way that they talk about it, they lose their own aura. They're creating an aura around themselves, right? But you mentioned the name. You mentioned the Smithsonian, though. I mean, it's not for nothing they're going after that particular institution. It seems to me. And there's another name that comes up in your piece, which is important, which is the name of someone we should all be thinking about. Maybe he could be part of the debate. It's the name of Lonnie Bush, who is a friend of yours. I know a friend
Lonnie Bunch.
Lonnie Bunch. I'm sorry. Why am I kidding?
Oh, yes.
Lonnie Bunch. You might want to edit that one down, folks.
That's all right.
He, a friend of yours, and
he's a director of the
African American Museum.
Well, he was director of that. Now he's the secretary of the Smithsonian.
Yeah, he's secretary of the Smithsonian. He began by founding.
What they want to try to do is to try to get rid of him. I mean, that's basically what they're doing.
They're trying to get him to resign.
Right, exactly.
So thus far, he won't do it.
So
what is there about that, David? About
what is there about Lonnie Bunch in particular, and what he has done that they want to destroy?
What do you know about the backstory, David, about the pressure being applied to Lonnie Bunch?
Well, I can say most of what I know. I'm actually on the board of commissioners of the National Portrait Gallery. I was only put on it a year ago by Kim Saye, the former director who has been forced to resign. I don't know the details of exactly how that happened, although I know something. They are really after Lonnie. Lonnie is a lifetime, frankly, public servant of public history. And the most successful museum in modern times has been the African American Museum. It was and still is, I think, the hottest ticket in Washington. It brought Black history right to the center of the mall and said, here, we're at the center. We belong. Our story is everyone's story. Our story belongs to the country. It is so woven into the nation's past. And that museum shows you that, from the slave ships on the bottom level all the way to that incredible floor full of Black music, which everyone loves, and every other aspect of that museum. Lonnie Bunch made that happen. He raised the money for it. He put together the teams. And teams, of course, fight like hell over exhibitions. As Sean, you've been an advisor to this exhibition and that exhibition. They're always a troubled course to get to the end. But by God, they pulled that off. And it became so successful that the whole world wanted to see it. Well, to the Trumpist, to Heritage Foundation up the street, what is wokeness? Well, wokeness, in their vision, just took over the mall. It took over that space right by the Washington Monument. Lonnie's office in that building up in the top, when he was director, looked right out at the Washington Monument. And it was so moving just to see him there. This African American from Newark, New Jersey, historian, who ends up creating this place, which is there forever, we hope. So Lonnie, I suppose, to them is the symbol, but he's just one symbol to them of how the Smithsonian, in their view, has run amok with liberal left kinds of history. Now, I don't know every exhibit that the Smithsonian has tried to have. I now know a fair amount about what the National Portrait Gallery has been doing. And Kim Saye, to be frank, had moved that museum into the 21st century, a very difficult process, if for no other reason than portraiture is by definition kind of conservative in its roots. It started, paintings of monarchs. And she helped that museum learn how to redefine what a portrait means and how modern art is part of portraiture. It's amazing what they've done there. But she is the one they first targeted, and it had something to do with a label that had been used about Trump himself. And this is the level at which the White House folks they literally go to Smithsonian museums and read labels. They find a label they don't like. They go back and tell their bosses, there's a bad label over there. There's a bad label over there. Let's go get them. Now, how far will this go? I think that letter that came out 2 days ago from the Smithsonian to Lonnie Bunch saying they're demanding top to bottom reviews of everything done at 8 of the Smithsonian museums. This is showing us now. They're going to go to any level. They're not stopping at anything. No matter what deal Lonnie and his great finesse can make to stave them off, they're not going to stop at anything while they have the power. And Sean, I think you really hit on something we could keep talking about. Why do they go after history? Because it's the story of the country. It's the narrative we live in. It defines who we say we are. It has to do with who's an American. And it really rubs up against this question of pluralism, this multiplicity of this crazy quilt society we have, that they exist. The far right now exists to try to stop that somehow, and hence the immigration issue. They can't stop it. This country is so diverse that it can never be turned around. But if they can control history, they believe anyway, then they can exercise social order in a host of other ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who we are is defined by who we've been. And, in this case, and the Christian nationalist part of this, I think, is absolutely crucial, though, because in effect, what they're trying to do is to say that the United States, or the United States of America, was not born out of the Enlightenment, not born out of the ideas that are in the Declaration of Independence, but was divinely inspired. And who is the ultimate divinely inspired, leader? It's Donald Trump. That is where it all leads. But it begins in a basically a lie about American history. And you take that forward, and everything else follows.
Yeah,
there are other elements to it as well, but that seems to me to be the core. No, Sid, you want to join in?
Well, I would say that they've developed this new Trumpian theology in which Trump is the head of kingship and he's this is in its essence anti-Christian and blasphemous as well, but it is completely new and sectarian, and yet they insist that the entire country was based on this this new doctrine, the theology that they have just developed around a convicted felon. Who they say is, been, touched by divinity.
Right. And none of them have read, let's face it, or perhaps even heard of Abraham Heschel, Reinhold Niebuhr, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great Christian and Jewish theologians who have showed us the relationship between theology and history, and it's both its dangers and its uses over time. They don't even know if they do. They hate these kinds of writers. But Sean, you used the word enlightenment, and I've done 3 teacher institutes this summer, Hinder and Jan, and in the last one I was at, we had this whole day practically of discussing these very issues, like what's happening in your school system, what's happening and we had teachers from Oklahoma and Texas and lots of places where they're under tremendous duress, from having 10 commandments on their walls to what they can do with curriculum and whatnot. And they kept pressing on this idea. So why are they doing this? Why are they okay? So I ended up, and I think one of the teachers sort of used the word. We ended up talking about the Enlightenment itself. Mm. What is Trumpism trying to turn back? Well, they don't get up every day and say, let's kill the Enlightenment.
Oh, I don't know about that. I'm not so sure about that.
Well, David, I think the great principles Kevin Roberts, who you wrote about, does think about that explicitly. Yeah. And I do think that some of them who are related to him, particularly on the Catholic far right, like Adrian Vermeulen and Deneen at Notre Dame, do think about this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And, their roots are really in Joseph de Maistre and
right.
monarchism, fascism,
The reactions against the American Revolution, precisely.
And the Syllabus of Errors of 1864 of Pope Pius IX, which declared, anathema of the United States as a liberal monstrosity during the Civil War. And if you read it, that's their program.
And if you look back, as I do in this essay in the New Republic, I have a whole section that I drew right off Richard Evans's work on the rise of the Third Reich. By the way, that trilogy is magnificent. I mean, that's just one of the great works of history, is that whatever it is, almost 2,000 pages on the origin, the power, and the Third Reich at war. But the Third Reich, if you like, succeeded in coming to power in a culture, a society, in fact, the whole of Europe, that had come to detest democracy, fear democracy, hated democracy. Democracy had sent the economy to hell in a basket. But, if you start just naming the great principles of the Enlightenment, these are the things they hate. Liberty, equality, reason, the doctrine of consent, popular sovereignty, God knows, rule of law. I mean, all of these.
Well, also, religious tolerance and separation of church and state, which goes all the way back to the founding of before the founding of the United States, to England, and past the Glorious Revolution, some of them explicitly want to refute John Locke, like Vermeulen and so on.
Sure.
Whose portrait, David, as we know, whose portrait, John Locke's portrait, is hung in Monticello.
Of course. Sure.
The author of the Declaration of Independence, albeit a slaveholder, as Lincoln said, still the author of the Declaration.
All honor to Jefferson, Lincoln said. So yes, it's all there.
Yeah.
Right. But the Enlightenment roots of all of this are crucial, because this is basically a theocratic attempt to bring back a pre-Enlightenment world. And what was the world that they were talking about? It was a world of superstition. It was a world of inquisition. It was a world of absolute tyranny of the church over everyone else, with the divine right monarchs as a part of that system. That they truly believe they can restore that. I was at a conference, I think we were at the same conference where some of these people who were Heritage Foundation types talked about themselves as restorationists. Yeah. And I asked them, well, what do you want to restore? And I said, you want to go back before the New Deal? Oh, you want to go back before the Civil War? Well, no more slavery, but yeah, basically. And I said, well, do you really want to go back to yes, we want to go back to pre-Locke. That is what they're talking about. And,
that's pre-Declaration.
It's pre-Declaration, pre-Locke. They're talking about, they're talking about
everything.
They want to bring back,
they
want to bring back divine right monarchy. And that's basically their idea. Now, the question is, how do we go about? I mean, there are certain parts of the country which are very, as you say, you talk to teachers all the time. You do an exemplary job of that, David, and talking to local teachers who are under all kinds of pressure. That's one front line, really, of our battle. But there are many front lines we have to, fight this out on. So where do we begin? I mean, what would you tell us to do?
Well, we get asked.
We're looking to you, David. You're our exemplar.
Yeah. Well, I'm not providential either, so don't. Anyway, well, first of all,
we will talk about reason.
Okay, but first of all, we might have to put reason aside. And here's Sean and Sid. Sid, your career in politics, and Sean, you've written so much about the nature of politics. This is no longer a fight about what's the best interpretation of American history. It's no longer just about the substance. We can trot that out all day. This is a political fight. This is a fight about political persuasion. And let's face it, we academics are not terribly good at that. But we have to get mobilized. We have, in all the ways possible, whether it's podcasting or just this morning, we put out another statement from the Organization of American Historians about the Smithsonian letter. We've done so many statements. I don't know what good they do, but it's one little power we have. But we have to realize we can't just make our normal arguments about the best history, the best interpretation, the truth. That this is a political fight. So how do we organize politically? That's why I went after Heritage and went after Roberts. Come out and debate us in public with a public audience. And there's a congressional committee interested. It's actually only the minority caucus on the committee is interested in doing a forum for members, which might only be Democrats. That's a problem. And I think, secondly, we have to get into their media. That is, we have to get into their spaces. We have to fight them on their own grounds, and hope that we can begin to persuade some people. Because if we can't, what's the next alternative? And frankly, what this has me thinking now every day, and I don't like it, is what kind of rebellion could we lead? Is it a rebellion in op-eds? No, we can't stop there. Although, Sid, you are one of the most prolific writers of op-eds I've ever seen, and they're fantastic. But we have to get into public spaces. We might have to throw rallies in Washington outside Congress. We might have to go to a major national park site where they're trying to, get people to complain about something they found divisive. We have to aim for these big questions, like, why is sometimes history divisive? Because that's the nature of history. We have a job to do for the public, and not just defending the best interpretation of capitalism or the best interpretation of slavery or anything. So beyond that, I don't know, but at some point, this has to become political movement.
So, David, you raise a really interesting question here that also has its roots in history that I'd like you to address. Some of it involves building a movement. Some of it involves persuasion, communications, and some of it involves party politics. And some of it involves the nature of our governmental system, and as we face it, developing a responsible Congress to check and balance this extremism. And all of those need to be kept in mind. And one person who had thoughts on this is someone you're familiar with, Frederick Douglass. And it's worth asking you, what would Frederick Douglass say?
Oh gosh, I've had that question many times, and I never am satisfied with my answers. First of all, Douglass would tell us, keep a long view. He would tell us how many changes he'd been through in his life, the impossible dreams that he walked out of slavery with at age 20, the impossible situation, the near total loss of hope in the 1850s after Kansas, Nebraska, and Dred Scott, and so on and so forth. And then comes the Civil War. And then for a while, the almost impossible hope of urging the Lincoln administration to move against slavery. But once Lincoln does, comes a revolution. So, he would probably trot out these vast changes he had lived. In fact, that's what he called them in his third autobiography, the vast changes of the middle of his life. He would say, keep a long view. Now, that's not going to satisfy a lot of people. That's not going to satisfy the curators at the Smithsonian who are trying to bite their lips and keep their jobs. That's not going to satisfy the teacher out there who is afraid to do this or that in her classroom, et cetera, et cetera. Douglass would also probably, I don't know, of course, is the answer, but Douglass would love a debate with these Christian nationalists, because he was so brilliant at using biblical narrative, using the Hebrew prophets in particular, as I wrote about in my biography. He could hardly deliver a speech without Isaiah and Jeremiah there, either in direct quotes or portions. He would turn this on them. And he would say, you think America's special? Yeah, okay, it was special, but it needed an Armageddon to remake itself. And Douglass was a believer to a great extent in that vision of history. He said, we remade it once. And then it was, it was all but erased for 70 years, and we remade it again. Well, he doesn't know we remade it again in the civil rights movement. But he would give people the strength to think about how this republic has been destroyed before, remade, all but destroyed again, remade, and now it could be destroyed again and remade. He'd be right there with the Christian nationalists in this apocalyptic view of history, but with a totally different aim for it. That's the Douglas I would hope could take on Kevin Roberts and just chew him to pieces. Anyway, Douglas might also say, my narrative, put it back in play. It's not that.
Put it back in. Yes, absolutely.
And
But
read it.
another thing.
They tell me it's the greatest slave narrative ever written. So why?
Well, as Trump says, he could have the blurb on it and put that in the Smithsonian. He's done an amazing job.
He's done an amazing job. But the other thing about Douglas is that Douglas, when he's not giving that speech, when he's not laying out what he has to lay out against Kevin Roberts, Douglas was an intensely political person. He understood power. He went to see President Lincoln. He talked to President, came away impressed by President Lincoln.
He moved to Washington, D.C. to be near power.
Moved to Washington, D.C., precisely. So the point is to redirect this movement, wherever we're talking, have a clear political sense in the way that Douglas had a clear political sense. I mean, by the time he gets to Reconstruction, he's even becoming very partisan. The Republican Party is the ship, all else is the sea.
He speaks at every Republican convention from 1868 to the end of his life.
He is the Lincoln Day speaker everywhere to the end of his life. He is the speaker on the anniversary of Lincoln's assassination, everywhere to the end of his life.
But this is the point, is that politics is not simply of movements pushing from the outside in. Politics is also from the inside out. And we have to understand that. And that's something that I think many academics also aren't so keen on. But we have to understand that, because that is, the midterm elections, should we have them, are essential to breaking this fever, is essential to breaking through. And unless we have that sense as well as everything else, we may not be able to get anywhere.
What if Sid Blumenthal, Sean Wilentz, me, and all the other historians we can muster really put the pressure on the Democratic Party to take up this issue? What if Democrats found their voice saying, you know what, they're taking away your history. They're taking away your story. They're taking away your narrative. All those of you who are descendants of immigrants, which is most of you, all of you who are the descendants of slaves, which is millions of you, all of you who are descendants of whomever, they're taking your past away. They're taking your history away. They're grabbing your identity. They say you've engaged in identity politics. Well, now they want to take your identity, spin it in a machine, and spread it out in a different way. Why not really politicize this idea of how important history is to self-understanding in this country, and for that matter, the whole country? If Democrats can't argue that, and at the same time, they've got to make an economic argument, obviously, to the working class. They got to get them back. I know that, but people like Chris Murphy and many others would be very effective doing this. They know some history.
Well, there are a lot of members of Congress, including Jamie Raskin,
even apart from just making the case. The first step, I think, was for them to understand it themselves, to have it in their souls. That would be a way to fight it out in a way that's different from the day-to-day, the this and the that. They have to understand that really, truly is that kind of fight. It's an historical fight. And there are some congressmen I know very well who would be very happy to make that, who certainly understand it. That would be step number one, to make that case to them so they get it, and then about the larger issues.
So, David, let me propose a couple of things here. One, I think you should write a formal letter, if you haven't already, to Kevin Roberts, and propose a debate.
I was hoping my essay would be that letter, but it may not work.
No, they're not reading it.
Put it in the mail. They don't read the New Republic.
And insist on a reply. And see what happens. And if he doesn't, you can publish your letter in the New Republic again, which gives you a second bite at the apple. And two, I'm thinking in a kind of mischievous way about the kind of exhibits that the Smithsonian ought to show um, in light of the Trump administration pressure on it to show true history. So, liberals and progressives and so on, and just professional historians also, they want to show the full picture, and they want to show how the country's progressed, and they want to show all the movements, and they want to show the legislation and the great figures and so on. Well, why not show the other side? Why not have an exhibit on the know nothings? Why not have an exhibit at the same time about the Confederacy and what it really was? Why not have an exhibit about the first Klan and all the white terrorist organizations that destroyed Reconstruction? Why not have an exhibit about the second Klan? Why not have an exhibit about the white citizens' councils against?
A lot of that is in the African American Museum, and that's one of the reasons they don't like it.
Yeah, they don't like it. So, but why? Why? Let's put that front and center.
Yeah.
Starting with, let's have the know nothings.
Yeah.
Let's have an exhibit.
Well, Sean, you've studied these people as much as I have, but the whole pro-slavery ideology that came out, the vast amount of writing, not only did they hate John Locke, they hated Jefferson, they hated the Declaration.
Explicitly.
Absolutely explicitly. They said Jefferson was wrong. And they had their own version of turning the Enlightenment around. We imagine an exhibit that
the George Fitzhugh cabinet, right.
Lincoln pointed this out, David, that that they hated the Declaration of Independence, and they hated the phrase "all men are created equal." And he pointed out that the Confederate Constitution wiped that out, and that it did not begin with the phrase "we the people." So
some of them were downright utopians, not unlike the Kevin Roberts of our own time.
Yes.
Hughes from Mississippi, he was a utopian. He thought you could create the perfect society around a slave plantation because you had everything properly ordered, the means of production, the means of labor, race relations. It was the perfect system. Well, there is a certain utopianism in this far right effort. Look, the trouble though at the Smithsonian, Sid, is that they're all running scared. That if you talk to,
they're running scared everywhere, David.
That's true everywhere. Yeah.
If you talk to Anthea Hartig, for example, I shouldn't have named her probably, but I know her well. She preceded me as president of the OAH at the Museum of American History. She has maybe 20 full staff of curators who do, and it's like, what can they do and keep their jobs? It's easy for us to say, oh, resist, and I wish they would. I mean, wouldn't it be something if hundreds of employees of the Smithsonian just walked out next week and gathered on the mall and said, no, we're not doing your review? Well, they'd get fired. And that's the, the club that Trump has over people right now. It may take something like that, but
this means getting to the point of pointing out, as we've been talking in a lot of our episodes on the Court of History, that this regime is essentially a regime of fear and terror. And they run that way. And historically, there have been many regimes of fear and terror. And that is another point. I don't know how to develop it exactly, but that's the point to bring out, is that this is how these people operate, by threatening, by bullying, but by doing more than that. They don't need a Ku Klux Klan. They have one out there that's intimidating every federal judge who goes up against Donald Trump, for example, or anyone else. To bring that element out, which actually is in combination with the pre-Enlightenment ideas, because all of those worlds ran on terror and fear. So if we can somehow bring that out, make that clearer to people, that this is what's going on here, and to counteract the bullying, and maybe do a little bullying back, if you will. We're so scared about doing the wrong thing. Well, maybe we should do that a little bit.
Oh, I agree.
thing, but the right thing is standing up to it. But I would also say it's important historically to point out that this has roots too. And and it goes back, among other things, to slavery, to the Confederacy, very much so. Very much so.
Oh, yeah.
And even before, the nativist part goes back to the Know Nothings. And before that, Trump invokes the 1798 Alien Enemies Act.
The only bit of the Alien Exclusion Act is still on the books. Yeah, right.
And there were these panics all the way back about
a couple years ago or more, I wrote 2 different op-eds in various places about how Trumpism had become a lost cause. And I went through the ingredients of the Confederate lost cause, and I said, well, tick off your boxes. It's pretty. And then after he got shot, I said, oh my God, he's almost martyred, and on and on and on. Well, what we've got now, though, is the first lost cause in American history that got right back into power.
Right.
Almost overnight. I mean, it took the Confederates half a century to really get back into power, and then they didn't quite completely get back into power. But that's what
in the South they did. In the South,
they did. No question.
But in a way, this is the lost cause.
Yeah.
There are direct connections between what's going on now and that cause.
Let's rewrite that piece, man. Let's get that. They are, because they have, they have their January 6 martyrs now who have all been pardoned. They have narrative after narrative that just blunts the truth. It's a story built on lies, as much of the lost cause was. The difference is, I mean, I've said this in print too, at least the Confederates, had a tremendous story of loss. They lost 300,000 people and most of a civilization. So, give them credit. They really lost something. Trumpism is about these superficial narratives of grievance. Not that the grievances aren't real, but it's a narrative about an America that has been lost, and they're going to somehow regain it. And maybe, but maybe not. But back to the movement question. I think this is on everybody's mind. What can we do? And you must hear from people after your podcast, like, all right, what I'll sign up. What can I do? Sign up where? To do what? Well, you can act locally. You can, we used to say, write in your local newspaper, but how many of those are left? You can act locally. You can fight locally. You can go to those town halls that a few brave Republicans are holding and raise hell, and that's been good. But we need a broader movement here. And Americans, let's face it, where do we look for that time when Americans stood up and fought for history? I mean, it's just not a visceral cause in the way that the economy obviously is, or abortion is, or immigration is, or war and peace can be. But all of that is our history, and we're losing it. It's being stolen. Maybe we need a story of the stolen history now or something.
Well, exactly. And, unfortunately, we're coming at the end of the time we have to talk. We want to do this again. We will do it again. But they have drawn the battle line. They have called us out. They, in effect, have thrown down the gauntlet. We have to pick it up and throw it back. And I think that debating Kevin Roberts is a perfectly wonderful way to begin this kind of project.
You want to join me in one of those debates?
Absolutely. I love it.
Yeah.
Bring right there too.
Kevin Roberts right here with you, and we'd love to have him, and we'll see if he's a profile on courage.
We'll see. Somebody at Heritage must tune into you guys to make sure they're monitoring you.
Well, that may be. So, guys,
that would be a disappointment if we were not monitored by the thought police.
Absolutely. But we want to make sure that they have the invitation in hand. David, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. We'll keep on doing it. Godspeed to you. And for the Court of History, as we say, this session of the Court of History is adjourned.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.